Absolutely love the chanting music. Alright, we are live with Shaman. We've got Discord pulled up. And yep, love the chanting music. Is everybody back over in Discord yet that's gonna be there?
I guess so. I'm here at least. I'm not sure where Cindy is.
Cindy went AWOL.
I don't know. I heard my dad scream something from downstairs. Didn't hear what it was.
Oh, okay. Ah, alright, well, here we go then.
I'm here.
I'm here. Yeah, hey, well. Alright. What are we doing? Live with the Shaman. I need to remind everybody that this is an adult channel. We are liable to use non-politically correct terms. We never allow for discriminating racist terms used on this channel. However, we do use sometimes strong language, and our topics are generally not politically correct. Right.
Right.
I heard an echo on that one. Alright, looks like we got Cindy and Amy in the live chat. And who all we got over in Discord? Announce yourself.
I'm me. People like to call me Nicole sometimes. Depends on who the person is.
Okay.
Oh, my stepdaughter, your name's Nicole. No. Girl. Yeah, no.
Girl.
Anyway, this is Cindy. I'm here to.
That's alright. So, what's our topic? Is fantasy good for learning? Well, hi Amy. So, what do you think? Is fantasy good for learning? I know my standpoint on it. What do y'all think?
I think it depends on the person's perspective.
Yeah, but doesn't everything? But I mean, how do we... Yeah, well, let's see if I can get this out there without stumbling over my own 2 feet. How do we know that the quote shaman books that are out there are that any book, witchcraft book, Wicca, Fae, shaman, druid, whatever, how do we know that's the reality? And that's kind of going to be our topic of one of our open pagan churches, is what is reality. But how do you know, or what makes you think a particular book is reality for you?
For me, it's whether or not it resonates with what I believe in, what seems logical to me.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, yeah, guess fantasy would be okay. Good learning. But you have to be able to keep a check in reality.
Okay, what's reality?
I have a reality check with counsel to help me keep it real.
Let's think about what fantasy is. Right? Um, Fantasy is a dream, um, something seen in meditation, something we would like to happen or to have but do not. Um, One of my fantasies, I guess, would be that I have all the money I need to do or all the money I want to do what I want to do with. But is that a fantasy or is that a dream? And are fantasies not formed from dreams to a degree? So the simple answer, I think, would be, from my perspective, is of course we learn from fantasy. I've had people tell me the astral isn't real. I've had people tell me that alternative planes of existence aren't real. And I find it interesting that these very people that tell me if you can't see it and touch it and feel it, then it's not real. But these are the very people that profess Christianity. Bit of a double standard, I think. So if we go on the assumption that fantasy isn't real, that fantasy is no way of learning, then how do we ever form a consciousness or an assumption of self and reality? Anybody? Damn, I'm not used to hearing you all this quiet. Wow. So, let's try this. Have you ever had a fantasy, be it a life fantasy, um, okay, a sexual fantasy, and you don't need to put the details in there. Granted, we're an adult channel, but I do want to keep it rated R, at least. But have you ever had a fantasy of any kind come true?
Yeah, but it required a lot of effort.
That's almost intriguing, but I'll leave it alone. um, have you ever had a fantasy that that came true that wasn't that didn't turn out to be the reality, didn't match the fantasy?
Every single time.
Why did I know that was coming?
Because how you imagine things are never how they actually are.
True that. True that. I am, in my personal experience, I too have never had a fantasy match the reality once the fantasy actually happened? Are hopes, is hope a fantasy?
Brushing the line of fantasy, I think hope is a different thing than fantasy. Fantasy is complete imagination, whereas hope is a feeling that something will come true.
Agreed. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make, because I've had people misconstrue hope and fantasy. Case in point, expectations. Now, people argue the point with me all the time when I tell them I have no expectation of the human race. Everyone I know, no matter how close they are to me, no matter how much I care about them or how much I love them, I try not to have expectations, morning Dave, that are brought on by fantasy. And I try even more to not have expectations of the human race because of hope. Now, in retrospect, I don't lose hope for the human race. I don't lose hope that people will do what they say they're going to do, be where they say they're going to be, and I don't lose hope that people will be congruent to their words. Can we learn from fantasy? Absolutely. I believe that in every parable, every children's rhyme, in every myth, there is a monicum of truth. There is a monicum of reality. But if we think about the word fantasy and the thing it conjures,
Sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
I was out cooking.
No worries. When I was talking about expectations, Dave posted, and it also keeps us from getting disappointed a lot. Yes. So when we keep fantasies from forming expectations, which happens a lot, and we keep hope from forming expectations, which also happens a lot, we're human beings, it sets us up, in my opinion, it sets us up to be disappointed, hurt, sometimes seriously misled, and very damaging. Would you guys not agree?
In my 34 years of life, here in maybe the past 5, I have learned never to trust anybody when they say they're going to do something, because yes, otherwise it hurts.
Yeah, hope is a amazingly powerful word. Hope is also a term with its own definition and meaning. Dave says, I fantasize about winning $1 billion in a Powerball. Yes, absolutely. My problem is with winning the lottery, you only have a chance of winning it if you play it, and I don't play it because I forget to go put the lottery on. And then I forget to check the numbers. So if I did put it on and then I did win a Powerball, hell, I'd forget to check the freaking numbers. I've always fantasized about having a very large round building where we could cast open circle with a roof on it that expanded back to show the night sky. But we could cast open circle with room for people to sit in the variable circles and engage or just watch or be a part. In fact, me and Cindy and quite a few people have fantasized, if you will, about that. I'm echoing.
That's probably good to me.
Cindy got the echo going.
Do I? Echo. No, the fantasy, we fantasized about that. What was it? The open church where we had the circle in the middle, and then we have a fire right there that go up through the vent, but we'll see the skyline, and then we'll have sections off where people would live, or they would have church in there, teaching classes.
Yeah, earlier on we fantasized about having a pagan commune, if you will, where there were not necessarily any leaders or what have you. But staying with topic, is fantasy good for learning? I believe that fantasy, as long as we have fantasy, and we keep dreaming and we keep pushing ourselves for more. I've had people tell me, you live in a fantasy world. I'd like to. Unfortunately, I'm stuck to my perception of reality just like everybody else.
But you gotta have fantasy, or I call it hope, fantasize.
Well, like we said, hope and fantasy are two different terms. And they mean two entirely different things. But to me, if you don't keep a balance on your fantasy, it can build, like I said earlier, expectations, unrealistic expectations of people. It can build unrealistic expectations of things that you would like to see happen.
And I got a question on fantasy.
Go ahead.
Do we use fantasy to see our counsel?
Say that again.
Do we use fantasy to see our counsel?
I don't think it's fantasy.
Well, as in fantasy, as in a person be able to perceive what they look like.
Well, I could see that. I mean, I know.
Oh boy. Hey, Sean.
Did I miss?
Sorry.
Something?
Yep, Sean just joined.
There he is. All right.
Oh boy.
Angela says yes. Reality is built on ideas and ideals. We need to dream to discover our potential. I absolutely agree with that. Fantasy is good for learning because it teaches us the good, the bad, and the indifferent. I tend to change a little bit, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I change it to the good, the bad, and the indifferent. If we don't fantasize about life and the things we'd like to do, we could lose track and stop trying. You know, like Angela said, we need to dream, we need to fantasize, we need, as human beings, we need to keep going on. These people that just give up and uh, end up becoming nothing, it's because they either don't dream or they don't go for their dreams, they don't fantasize or they don't go for their fantasies. Amy says visualization. Yes, visualization is a part of fantasy, a part of dreaming, and visualization is even a part of hope. Um, Dave says either things are or they're not. Too many people have their thoughts. Too many people have their thoughts off in fantasy, in the gray area, and they don't want to face reality because they don't want to face who they are inside. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Angela says we play pretend as children to practice social situations and learn from each other. Yes, absolutely. I believe that when we look into ourself, when we look into the things that we stand for, the things that we idealize, whether it's right or wrong, it is what it is. Now, here's the thing about shamanism. As shaman, we live in the different realms. We are healers. Shamanism is a lifestyle. We believe wholeheartedly in magic, in energy, in fantasy. We also believe in maintaining, now listen to this one part real close, maintaining our perception of reality. If you don't maintain your perception of reality, then you begin to form a bubble around yourself that is fulfilled with nothing but your fantasies. Those that really truly do live in a fantasy world don't want to face their perceived reality. And if you'll notice, one of the things that I always put out there is perceived reality, your perception of your reality. Somebody want to say something?
No, that's like Angela was talking. She said that we pretend as children to practice our social skills or situations.
Well, yeah, and I believe, well, I think one of the biggest downfalls to becoming an adult is we lose the sight of fantasy. You know, I don't know when it happens. I couldn't tell you how old I was when it happened to me, but children have the sight. They have the unabridged sight that they can see the unicorns, they can see the Pegasus, they can see the griffins, they can see the spirits that walk the earth. That at some point we as adults tend to lose that ability to a degree. Some adults keep it. Some adults keep the ability to be able to see the metaphysical creatures, the spirits that walk.
So there is a glorious movie that encompasses everything that you just said, and it's called The Never-Ending Story.
Yes. There were 3 books of the Never-Ending Story.
Yes.
I've been wanting to find those on audio. Um, I've seen all of the movies, and of course, we all know I don't read for shit because I forget what I read on the last page. But I would love to find the Never-Ending Story on audio. In fact, I think I'll check the torrents and see if I can find it. But yes, you're right. The Never-Ending Story does reconnect us back to fantasy, and so does the Black Jewel trilogies, the Black Jewel series that's required reading for the Grove of the Celtic Shaman, because it reminds us that where we're from may not necessarily be where we think we're from. Angela says we slide into a mutual agreement on what reality is as adults and shut ourselves off from perception. Yes, absolutely. And, I was raised with the understanding that energy is always there. I was raised with the understanding of how to feel energy. But I was raised with that. So I was never told as a child energy is not real. I was never told as a child what you're feeling is not real. I was always told to analyze your feelings, to get a perception in how you perceive those feelings, and make sure that emotion is not driving your feelings. That's the hard part.
That's like when I was studying gardenering with a lady in Beaumont, I'm not saying her name. She would put us in like a fantasy to be able to look at we needing to learn.
Yes. And when we meditate, when we go into a meditative state, we use in, kind of what Cindy was saying earlier, in retrospect, we kind of use fantasy to perceive what our council looks like in shamanism. Our, if we use, which in shamanism we use the Council of Nine, but they don't have to have names, they don't have to have faces. They are the 5 elements and the 4 cardinal points which make up the Council of Nine. Some of us have names on our Council of Nine of different deities that perform functions within that particular element or that particular cardinal point. It could be construed as fantasy, yes. To me, mine are very real. That metaphysical 2x4 they smack me with on occasion is very real.
Right.
So here's another thing about fantasy. Now we're 28 minutes past the hour, so let's move into the next segment. Is fantasy good for learning? Which I think we all agree it is. But let's move to the next segment of how many of you have actually had a physical reaction to a fantasy that you had, either in astral, on one of the planes, or on the sexual planes. How many of you have actually had a physical, visual reaction to fantasy?
Okay, so if you want to consider casting a spell fantasy, I have actually had one of those. I cast a spell for a job and I regret doing it because as soon as I did it, someone got fired and then I got the job.
Yeah, gotta love cause and effect. One of the things that learning from fantasy teaches us, everything has a cost. Magic has a cost. It's always said be careful what you wish for because it just may come true. I've known people in the past that wished for large sums of money. Um, Within 72 hours, a relative passed away and they had quite large sums of money. But the cost was a relative had to pass away. And like you say, I've had people that have gone to altar and cast to get a better job. Now, in retrospect, these individuals lost the job they had and was out of work for a long time until they found the better job.
Oh boy, we know people like that.
Yeah. Now, let's walk a tightrope for a minute, if we shall. I don't consider casting a spell, okay? I don't personally consider that fantasy. Maybe semantics. But I consider casting magic to making a wish, to putting that energy out to the cosmos. And the cosmos meaning whatever deity you may follow, whatever council, whatever you may follow, takes that and they go, okay, well, your words are ABC. So, was the cast benign? Can we help you with that without too much of a cost? Well, in the shaman perspective, deity looks at your heart. So here's where we're walking a tightrope. I've always taught my students, when you go to altar and you light that candle, and you may say one thing, but something totally different is in your heart, and you commit that to fire. You commit that to the fire element. You send that to the air element, and the air element takes it to deity. Deity puts it in a jar, puts a lid on it, mulls it around, shakes it around a little bit, and says, okay, you want it, you got it, there it is. So what's the cause and effect of that? Well, we all know every effect has a cause, and every cause has an effect. Even attempting to act out fantasy. One of the passages in the Black Jewel trilogies talks about dreams made flesh. Well, it's talked about a lot. Be careful what you ask for, because you just might damn well get it. And it may not be exactly what you thought you wanted. But when we're learning from fantasy, I don't consider magic to be fantasy. I consider magic to be energy. I consider magic to be the manipulation of energy. Whether it's for something good, something bad, or something individualized. It's that gray area that shamans so much walk, that gray tightrope, if you will. What we've also referred to as a knife's edge. You're walking that knife's edge. If you stand too long and you don't move, the knife will eventually cut you, because life is designed for perpetual movement. But when you think about fantasy, there is many different layers, I believe, to fantasy as there are layers to reality. But then that leads us to ponder, what is reality?
Reality is just plain.
Say again?
Reality is what we are now. It's what we are now. What we constantly think about. Is that a good way of putting it?
Reality is perception. Color is a real good explanation of reality. I am partially colorblind because of too much time welding, cutting torches, and what have you when I was younger. So there's some spectrum of green and some spectrums of blue, if you will, that I can't see real well. But reality is perception. Fantasy is just that. It's fantasy. It could be construed as a dream. Like I said earlier, a visualization of something. And we learn from it. We learn all the time. We step out on the porch to go to work during the winter, and the porch is iced over and we don't pay attention. We slip, fall, bust our ass on the porch and bounce down the porch. Been there, done that more than once. The reality is, to me, it hurt like hell. The reality is, somebody else said, find it funny as hell. I found it funny as hell once I stopped bouncing. Although, my ass did hurt. But I still thought it was funny. So, the reality is, I busted my ass. The reason for that reality is I didn't pay attention to how I was stepping and where I was stepping, knowing that it was 21 degrees outside. And it had been raining, freezing rain the night before. So let's kind of pull to a close. I think we've about beat fantasy to death. What are your ideas of things you've learned from fantasy? Anybody?
Just that standard adage of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else?
I'm a blank. They do it again.
Well, we learn from fantasy. And, I tell my daughter, who just turned 14, never lose sight of your fantasies. Never lose sight of your dreams. No matter how old you get. Hell, I'm 57, almost 58 years old. And some fantasies and dreams I've kind of put on a shelf because, I don't know, I see them as kind of useless right now. But never lose sight of your hopes, your dreams, your wishes, your fantasies. Don't lose sight of them. And when it comes to fantasy, learn from those fantasies. When you read a fantasy book, and it's a craft book on someone else's ideologies, written by their fantasies, their perceptions, and their ideologies. Take bits and pieces from it. And I'm going to draw to a close with this, if you will. When it comes to fantasy, enjoy, embrace, have fun with your fantasies, but don't let your fantasies draw forward unrealistic expectations. Learn from your fantasies. Each person, you can take 1,000 people with the same fantasy, and 1,000 of those people will learn 1,000 different things. So as we come into our fantasy and as we theorize what those fantasies mean to us, then I think we can put them in their place. I think that everything should be put in its place, and everything has a place to be put. Angela says, fantasy is a way of tapping into the power of creation and exploration of how pieces fit together. We can use those skills in our daily lives and craft work. Completely agree. I love it. Embrace your fantasies. Learn from them. You can manipulate those fantasies and make them work for you in real life, I think. But I do give this piece of advice. Don't get so hung up in fantasies that you lose track of that reality, that you lose track of what's real to you and what's really going on in the real world. We have to work for a living, we have to take care of responsibilities, and we have to do things. But we can absolutely learn from our fantasies. As always, Live with the Shaman, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next week, right here, with another topic.